problematic. Quite the contrary. They simply understood that any interpretation derived from this one verse had to be in accordance with the basic message and theme and hundreds of other verses in the Quran. To conclude, and the conclusion is a bit long, so to conclude, this is of course an academic conference. And academics are supposed to present facts as if they're completely neutral observations without any agenda or inherent biases on the part of the presenter. But let us not fool ourselves. Even academics have their own biases, otherwise they wouldn't be human. And I believe that my own inclinations, as it were, are self-evident. And I do not pretend to make any claims otherwise. I am an academic, and I do wish to view things in as much of a neutral light as possible. But at the same time, I'm a Muslim, and not just a committed one, but rather one that has had extensive training in the classical sciences of Islam, and in particular the sciences of theology. Therefore, I cannot merely speak as an academic. I must also speak as a Muslim theologian, and it is from that perspective that I offer my concluding remarks. Being as unbiased as I believe is humanly possible, I do not think that a claim that the Quran itself promotes a vision of soteriological pluralism is a claim that can be supported, even with the most sophisticated hermeneutical gymnastics, or what Abdul Hakim Murad calls a Copernican revolution. The accusation that such a reading of the Quran is a presupposed reading, a cherry picking of a selection of ambiguous verses which are then viewed with tinted lenses, is an accusation that is difficult to repudiate. No matter how politically correct or theologically generous or ethically pleasing such a reading is, in the end of the day, it is a reading that is simply not emanating from the Quran, but rather from external judgments of how things ought to be. They're emanating from a personal sense of unfairness, from individual experiences of acts of saintliness from the other. Such genuine and sincere feelings might well form the basis of one's personal convictions, but it would be unfair, unethical, and unacademic to extrapolate those sentiments and project them onto a religion that clearly has its own sources of theology and dogma. I think it is fair to say that the reason we have not seen the Quran historically read in this manner by anyone in the pre-modern era, even by the handful of Sufis who claim salvation outside of Islam, is simply because the Quran cannot be read in this manner with any sense of justice to the entire text. In fact, the assertion that some vacuous, undefined submission to God earns salvation flies in the very message of the life and times of the Prophet. Even the Quraysh, the arch enemies of the Prophet, submitted to God in some abstract sense. They believed in Him, they prayed to Him, they had some type of relationship with Him. To go even further, a pluralistic vision contradicts the very purpose of sending a prophet or revealing a book. It is as if a divine book is claiming to be God's final revelation, and a prophet is being told to announce his prophethood to all of mankind. But the message is, there's no need to believe in the message. A rather superfluous endeavor, to say the least. I do understand the awkwardness of my frankness, but if my youthfulness cannot be blamed for pointing out the emperor's nakedness, then I hope my theological conscience can. But my frank view does leave two very real problems, which exclusivists try to solve. The first of them concerns the human dimension, and the second, the divine. As for the human dimension, the main issue that is raised is the treatment of the other, like Rousseau himself referred to. How can I treat somebody nicely when I think that he is damned? It is true that an inclusivist view could potentially lead to prejudice and intolerance. But my point is, it does not necessarily do so. In fact, quite the opposite can and does occur. And this is a tangible reality that those who are involved in the Muslim community can attest to. A Muslim might actually treat a non-Muslim better, even if it is done with the selfish motive of showing him the beauty of Islam and showing him how good Islam is. But a Muslim might treat a non-Muslim better, simply because he wants to show the validity of his own religion. Therefore, my point is, I do not view there to be an inherent relationship between bigotry and prejudice and between exclusivist or inclusivist theology. There could be, there couldn't be. We need to solve that through education. I believe the second problem is far more profound, and that is, does such a narrow view of salvation lead to an intolerant and unmerciful God? How could a just and merciful and loving God unconditionally assign His wrath to those who might have theological views other than our own, but nonetheless have much good in them? Our own Farid Ishaq points out in his work on liberation theology, many of those who suffered fighting apartheid actually seem to exemplify Islamic values of standing for justice, of fighting on behalf of the poor and oppressed, more than many of the ultra-isolationist Muslim clerics. What is to be done of the clear examples of saintliness found in other religions? Or as one of the presenters said, does Saddam get to go to heaven and Mother Teresa go to hell? Well, to respond to this, the orthodox position would be that the religion requires not just orthopraxy, but also orthodoxy. The religion requires good belief and good actions. Iman and amal as-salih is the Quranic terminology together. But I don't think that that's our only response. I think that even from the most ultra-orthodox, traditionalist understanding of Islam, we can provide some glimmer of hope for such people. Not a bright, shining, radiant light that some reformers would like to see, but at least a glimmer of hope. And that glimmer of hope can be argued historically from within the tradition. That glimmer of hope is based upon two basic principles. Number one, and this is my conclusion. Number one, I know you're looking at me with the... Number one, the Quran clearly conditions God's punishment on those who have received the prophetic message and understood it and then rejected it. There has to be a bayan and a takdeeb. There has to be a understanding and then a knowing and conscious rejection. Like Ibn Taymiyyah says, that whoever opposes the guidance after it has been made clear to him. Ibn Taymiyyah says there must be a tibyan, there must be a bayan, there must be an attempt to make the religion clear to him. What this also means is that those who have not been exposed to Islam or exposed to it in an improper manner might possibly have an excuse on the day of judgment. And only God can fully judge whether someone has been exposed to Islam in a proper and correct manner. I personally don't know if I meet John and Jenny in the street whether they've heard the real message of Islam or whether they watch Fox News, in which case they will be excused on the day of judgment. Secondly, at least with regards to the Sunni tradition, there is a very explicit theological premise of not assigning a judgment of heaven and hell to a particular individual, no matter how righteous or evil, how Muslim or kafir the person was, but rather of leaving the individual fate to God. A specific non-Muslim is never said to be in hell, and a specific Muslim is never said to be in heaven, because the basic premise is only God has the right to judge. As 1340 says, إِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغُ وَعَلَيْنَا الْحِسَابُ. Your job is to convey, our job is to judge. We speak in generalities. Those who are good and righteous shall enter heaven. Not Yasir or Ahmed will enter heaven. We speak in generalities and not in specifics. When a theologian affirms the supremacy of his own tradition, when I affirm the supremacy of my tradition, I am not saying that I'm going to go to heaven and you're going to go to hell. Not at all. Rather, what I am saying is that I am following a path that leads to God's mercy. And that path is perfect. But I am a human being, am imperfect. You are following a path that will not lead you to God's mercy, but you as a human being might have perfect qualities. You might have good in you, and God might possibly reward you for that good. The judgment is on the paths and not on the individuals. Therefore, putting all of this together, I believe that there is no need for a radical reconstruction of our faith. There is hope for good people outside of the fold of the faith, but that hope is an exception to the rule, and it is one that God in His infinite wisdom and mercy dispenses, and not one that His servants preach and make the general rule. For those who believe in an all-merciful and all-wise God, we leave it to Him to judge people, and we trust His judgment. So to answer the question of whether there are multiple paths to God or one path, I believe the Quran is explicitly clear on this issue. In chapter 6, verse 153, we are told to announce, "My Lord has guided me to a straight path, a righteous religion, the religion of Ibrahim, the Hanif. And this is my path, the straight path, so follow it, and do not follow other paths, because they will lead you astray from His path. This is what He has commanded you, so that you may achieve righteousness." May God make us all amongst those who are righteous. And with that, I conclude my talk. Thank you very much.